On July 23, 1996, a family of 4 from Dresden, Germany, steered their rented green Plymouth Voyager into the heart of Death Valley. Egbert Rimkus and Cornelia Meyer, along with 2 young children, were on a dream vacation that ended with a single, optimistic note in a visitor log: going the pass. They were never seen alive again. In July, Death Valley is a biological ultimatum, a place where 120-degree heat turns the air into a furnace and the ground is hot enough to melt rubber. When their van was finally found months later, miles off-road and battered by the terrain, it was empty. The family had simply walked away from the only shade for miles and vanished into the shimmering, lethal heat. Today, we are tracing the final, desperate steps of the Death Valley Germans. The day began not with fear, but with the typical restless energy of a family road trip. Egbert Rimkus, a fit 34-year-old who loved the outdoors, was behind the wheel of a rented green Plymouth Voyager, a vehicle built for suburban grocery runs, not the jagged, sun-scorched throat of the Mojave. Beside him sat his girlfriend, Cornelia Meyer, and in the back, Egbert's sons, 10-year-old Georg and 4-year-old Max. They weren't supposed to be here. Their itinerary was standard: Las Vegas, then Yosemite. But the desert has a way of tempting the curious with the promise of a raw American experience. On July 22nd, they checked out of the Treasure Island Hotel and headed for the Furnace Creek Visitor Center. There they bought 2 copies of a German-language museum guide. To a tourist from Dresden, the thin lines on that map didn't look like death sentences. They looked like an adventure. Instead of staying on the paved roads, the family sought a shortcut through the southern reaches of the park. They spent their first night camping in the van at Hanaupa Canyon to save money. The photos found later on their Praktica 35mm camera showed a family enjoying a sunset, blissfully unaware that the mercury was hitting a lethal 124 degrees Fahrenheit. The next morning, July 23rd, they reached the Warm Spring Mine. It was here that Egbert left the final written trace of their lives. In the visitor log, he scribbled a brief, optimistic note in German: going the pass. He was referring to Mengel Pass, a boulder-strewn wall of rock that requires a high-clearance 4x4 and expert driving. In a front-wheel drive minivan, it was an impossibility. As the Voyager groaned toward the pass, the road vanished. The gravel turned into deep, flour-like sand and jagged volcanic rock. Egbert, likely realizing the pass was impassable, made a desperate turn down Anvil Canyon, hoping for a way around. Suddenly, the van lurched. The sound of tires bursting, not once, but 3 times, echoed through the canyon. The wheels spun, digging the axles deep into the white-hot sand. The engine gave one final, metallic groan and fell silent. When Egbert stepped out, the heat hit him like a physical blow to the chest. He looked at the tires. 3 of them were shredded to the rims. They were miles from the nearest human soul in a place where ground temperatures can melt rubber. They had a bottle of Bud Ice beer, a 3/4 full bottle of bourbon, and several empty water jugs. The shortcut had officially become a trap. The silence that follows a stalled engine in the desert is deafening. Inside the Plymouth Voyager, the temperature began to climb instantly. Without the air conditioning, the interior of the van transformed from a sanctuary into a convection oven. Egbert likely stood outside for a few minutes, his boots sinking into the blistering sand, staring at the shredded rubber of his tires. He was a fit man, an experienced hiker from the mountains of Germany. But the Mojave is a different beast. Here the heat doesn't just make you sweat, it attacks your internal organs. It's a dry, relentless pressure that makes your heart race as your blood thickens. Standard survival logic says, stay with the vehicle. A car is a large metallic signal for search planes. But Egbert was looking at his map, and the map lied. It showed a road just over the next ridge. He believed that if they could just hike a few miles, they would hit a paved road or a ranger station. He didn't realize that the road on his map was a washboard trail that even park rangers avoided in the summer. He didn't know that nobody would be driving by for weeks. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, not bringing cool air, but a heavy, suffocating warmth, they made the choice that sealed their fate. They packed what they could. They didn't take the heavy jugs of extra radiator water because they were too heavy to carry. They took the camera, the film, and the last of the juice. They locked the van. This detail haunts investigators to this day. Egbert locked the doors, perhaps thinking they'd be back in a few hours with a tow truck. They began to walk. The 10-year-old and the 4-year-old followed their parents into the jagged maze of Anvil Canyon. They weren't walking toward safety. They were walking deeper into the most remote, mountainous corner of the park. Behind them, the green van sat abandoned, its windshield reflecting the dying light like a blind eye. It held their suitcases, their thick German jackets, and the only shade for 20 miles. As the first stars began to pierce the desert sky, the Rimkus family was already miles away from the only thing that could have saved them, and the desert was just getting started. For 3 months, the desert was silent. Then, on October 21st, 1996, Ranger Dave Brenner was flying a helicopter over the southern reaches of Anvil Canyon. He wasn't looking for tourists. He was scanning for illegal drug labs. Instead, his eyes caught a glint of metallic green, a color that had no business being in the sun-bleached brown of the Mojave. When Brenner landed, he found a 1996 Plymouth Voyager. This wasn't a rugged 4x4 built for the rocks. It was a standard family minivan. It sat 2.4 miles downstream from Willow Spring, its axles buried in deep sand, 3 of its tires shredded to the rims. Since 1994, this area had been a wilderness area. Public vehicles were strictly prohibited, yet this van had pushed miles into the forbidden zone. Ranger Brenner peered through the windows. The van was empty, but the evidence inside told a story of a vacation that had turned into a nightmare. The discovery of the van on October 23rd triggered one of the largest search and rescue operations in the history of the National Park Service. Over 250 searchers, mounted units on horseback, and K-9 teams descended on the canyon. Even in October, the heat was a physical weight. The air was so dry that searchers' skin would crack and bleed within hours, their sweat evaporating before it could even cool their bodies. The search focused heavily on the warm spring mine and the surrounding tunnels. Teams crawled into the dark, suffocating shafts, their flashlights cutting through decades of dust. They expected to find the family huddled in the subterranean cool, waiting for a rescue that never came. Instead, they found only old mining equipment and a silence that felt heavy with dread. They checked every crevice, every shadow, but the family wasn't there. To understand why they couldn't be found, you have to understand the sheer, soul-crushing scale of Death Valley. It's over 3 million acres of wilderness, an area larger than the state of Connecticut. From the air, the search area looked like a crumpled piece of brown paper, a labyrinth of thousands of nameless washes and jagged ridges. In this landscape, a human being is less than a speck of dust. If you move just one canyon over from where searchers are looking, you might as well be on another planet. On the first day of the search, a team found the only piece of physical evidence they would have for the next 13 years. Roughly 1.7 miles southeast of the van, tucked under a scrubby bush, they found a single, empty Bud Ice beer bottle. Next to the bottle was a seat print, a flat indentation in the dirt where someone had sat down to rest in the only sliver of shade available. It was a heartbreaking image, a family of 4 sharing a single beer for its moisture, huddled together as the sun beat down. But after that bottle, the trail simply vanished. The searchers pushed north, they pushed west, and they pushed back into the mines. But they didn't go far enough south. The ground in that part of the valley is desert pavement, hard-packed volcanic rock that leaves no footprints. The bloodhounds, overwhelmed by the 120-degree air and the lack of moisture, couldn't pull a single scent from the air. On October 26, 1996, the official search was called off. The Death Valley Germans became a ghost story, a legend of 4 people who had walked behind a bush and evaporated from the face of the earth. For over a decade, the case remained cold until a man named Tom Mahood decided that the official search had made one fatal assumption about the geometry of survival. For 13 years, the case of the Death Valley Germans was a ghost story told around ranger campfires. But in 2009, it caught the attention of Tom Mahood, a retired engineer and search and rescue volunteer. Tom didn't look at the case like a ranger. He looked at it like a mathematician. He studied the topography and realized something crucial. The 1996 search had focused on the mines and the cabin because they assumed the family would stay near known shelter. Tom had a different theory. He believed that in the grip of heat stroke and desperation, Egbert Rimkus wasn't looking for a mine. He was looking for a way out. As Tom retraced the likely path, he identified the exact moment Egbert's logic failed. Standing near the abandoned van, looking south, there's a clear V in the mountain range, a gap that looks like a natural pass leading to civilization. On Egbert's map, that gap seemed to lead directly into the China Lake Naval Weapons Center. Egbert, used to the dense, well-marked geography of Germany, likely miscalculated the scale of the American West by an order of magnitude. To his eye, that mountain gap looked like a 2-hour hike. In the shimmering, deceptive light of 120-degree heat, distances in the desert collapse. What looked like 5 miles was actually 20. What looked like a military boundary with guards and water was just more scorched, empty earth. He was chasing a mirage of safety, leading his family deeper into a biological no man's land where no one, not even the Rangers, thought to look. On November 12, 2009, Tom and his partner Les Walker were miles into a dead zone near the military boundary. In a shallow wash, shielded by the glare of the sun, they found something that didn't belong to the desert. A sun-bleached bone, then another, then a scrap of fabric that had once been a shirt. Scattered in the sand were the remains of Egbert Rimkus and Cornelia Meyer. They were found nearly 8 miles from their van, a distance that, in that heat, represents a feat of pure, agonizing will. They had walked until their bodies literally shut down. It took another year of intensive, heart-wrenching searching to find the small, fragile traces of the children, Georg and Max, nearby. They had all died together, victims of a map that didn't show the true scale of the heat. The mystery was finally solved, but it brought no comfort. The shortcut Egbert had seen on his map had led his family into a biological trap. Think of the last moments, the silence of the canyon, the shimmering horizon that never got closer, the realization that the pass was just more desert. If you're planning a visit to Death Valley yourself, please be well prepared. This landscape doesn't give second chances. I spend 30 to 40 hours researching and editing each film to bring these stories to life. If you appreciated this deep dive, please subscribe to support the channel. I'm back with a new story every Friday. Until then, stay safe out there.